tonight, or this, golly, this morning. We've got a lot on the agenda, so we started a little bit earlier. Hopefully we can get you all out of here by 8:30 would be nice too. We're gonna start off with the policy 333, non-discrimination in curriculum. I'm gonna turn it over to Craig for a moment because he's the one who did all the work on this.
Well, thank you, Donna. I didn't do all the work, but thank you for the credit. I did put forth a proposal last time we met, and it seemed that it was fairly well received and worked on within this committee last time we met. So I have a few remarks to mention here. I've written them down so I get it right. I wouldn't say something stupid in it without thinking. So I'll just share that with regard to this this particular proposal to the board policy. So once again, we're reviewing the proposed board policy related to anti-discrimination, anti-CRT. Some of those present in our audience this morning were in attendance on August 19th when this proposal was first proposed, when this policy was first proposed. A good deal of time was spent researching and thinking through the elements and wording of this policy. Upon presenting it to this committee, I invited members to engage in discussion about it and to offer their contributions to its improvement. Tim Langer and Laura Myra especially offered valuable suggestions. Other board members also contributed to the discussion. I believe the citizens in attendance were able to observe a productive session of this committee in action. We finished the meeting with a nearly completed document, Tim, Laura, and I being tasked with completing the finishing touches, which we did by email by the end of the day. That document is before us for consideration this morning. As this document came up for action at our last full board meeting, it was referred back to this committee to reconsider the wording. It has been suggested that a number of specific words be named in the policy as not allowable in any discussion anywhere in the AHS school curriculum. Words such as white fragility, equality versus equity, unconscious bias, social justice, cultural competence, identity politics, just to name a few. While I respect the intent of these additions, I differ with the helpfulness of their specific inclusion in the policy for several reasons. First, this list of words is changing constantly along with their meanings. Personally, I believe this may be done intentionally to confuse. I don't know. I suspect that many of us here have never even heard of most of these words or phrases just a year ago. There will likely be new words and phrases a year from now. The inclusion of a list of vague and continually changing list of words could lead to miscommunication and misapplication of policy. Second, generally good policy is concisely written. Often less is better. To this point, in response to a citizen email, I read several informative articles, including one referencing the state of Oklahoma versus the state of Idaho's efforts to stop CRT in schools. The gist of the article, written by Frederick Hess, Director of Education Policy Studies at the American Enterprise Institute, was that, quote, the business of defining, policing, and implementing a list of prohibited ideas, or I might add, words, gets troubling fast, unquote, such as in the Oklahoma statute, which included a list of some 17 prohibitions, some of which are vague and difficult to define. On the contrary, quote, Idaho's legislation offers a fruitful model for tackling legitimate concerns without getting into the business of banning ideas or suggesting some topics should be off limits, unquote. As mentioned a few weeks ago, when I introduced this document, I essentially copied and pasted Idaho's statute into part 2 of this proposed policy. 3, This distinction is important because, as I outlined in our last policy meeting, prohibiting quote teaching various concepts could easily be understood as not allowing a teacher to answer a student's honest question, not allowing for free and open discussion with the teacher as a neutral facilitator, or not allowing reading assignments inclusive of a wide range of viewpoints. Again, this viewpoint would be akin to prohibiting questioning, discussing, or reading about the Holocaust, for example, pre-slavery and slavery in pre-Civil War America, or slavery elsewhere in the world, Jim Crow laws, the Civil Rights Movement, and Dr. Martin Luther King's influence on civil rights and voter registration laws. I think we can agree that we don't want our students to be ignorant of history. That said, clearly, neither the Arrowhead Board nor presumably the citizens of this district want the pernicious ideas inherent in CRT to be advocated or promoted by anything in the AHS curriculum. For these reasons, I propose that we adopt this proposal without any further changes, and that we move it forward to the board for a vote. Next, vote for board meeting.
I also went on all the House bills that were in some of the states that passed bills. And I wrote them up and I'm going to pass them out, and I'm going to show you that for the most part, what is in this policy that Craig had presented is pretty much what's in the policy of all these other states. Some of them are kind of wordy though. Instead of individual, it could just be his or her. Just for comparison's sake.
Did you have an extra copy of that?
Were there extras? No. You want mine?
No, if you're reading it, no.
Well, I wrote it. I don't need to read it.
Okay.
I mean, I didn't write it.
We
but
can share it here.
All right. Thank you very much.
Some of those bills are on there. I didn't check every state. So when you read those, is there anything that you want to add to Craig's?
Board members, we have Sue Cassetto, you know well, as our director of learning. We also have Dave Gierak as our English department chair, and Shayna name change. Shayna Hekimovich, who now is Shayna Morgan. Right.
That's easier to say.
Easier to say.
Congratulations.
And Shane is the chair of our social studies department. Those two departments would be most impacted presumably by policy development. So we have them here in case you have questions of them or what that would mean to curricula.
I presume you both had the opportunity to review the proposed policy. Any comments on it? Any thoughts as far as how it may impact your departments or curriculum in general?
The proposed policy that Craig had just read about, we would feel comfortable with that being passed as part of policies. So it doesn't contradict things that we're already doing. And it also is aligned with the state standards that we do have to follow that were adopted by the board. So I think that we would be comfortable with this policy.
I agree as well.
I think the key words in the policy are about nothing in the curriculum shall promote or advocate for the following, and then it goes through phrases that it would be promoting discrimination. It would be promoting CRT, and we're not doing that.
No, we're definitely not. That's not something we would want to do for our students. That wouldn't be fair to them.
I wonder if there's I agree with you, Craig. I think that this is really very complete. The one thing that I wonder if we could add something to the effect of a body of legal scholarship, under multiple names, known. I mean, something to the effect that, this is defined, I'm not sure, I'm trying to wordsmith it in my brain as I was reading this over and over, but I wonder if there's just a few words that could be added that help us realize that this has it goes under multiple names. But otherwise, I think this is a very strong policy. I think you did a great job researching it. I think I think the scope is global, which is really what we want it to be. We don't want it to be so, we don't want it to be restrictive, as you mentioned. So I agree with all that.
Excuse me, the problem I have with your comments there, Chris. As soon as you start delineating or enumerating things, we got an email from a constituent that listed 11 different words or groups of words: cultural competency, critical theory, race theory, identity politics, equity, diversity and inclusion, culturally responsive teaching, quality versus equity, white fragility, unconscious bias, internalized white supremacy, and the one I really like, and any other Marxist or non-Marxist terms or ideas such as abolishing economic system and so on and so forth. The problem is, as soon as you start enumerating things, you forget things or you miss things, or as you mentioned, a year later, there's a new word or new phrase. Prime example of that is the same person 2 hours and 16 minutes later said, "Oh, I also miss social justice," as one of the terms that got mixed in with CRT. That's the problem with enumerating things.
Well,
And that's where I have the problem with starting to do that kind of stuff, because we can't be changing the policy every month or every 2 months because there's a new phrase.
yeah, I completely agree with you, Mr. President. The one thing that so maybe you misunderstood what I was trying to say. So the thought was maybe, like, rather than defining any of those, a body of legal scholarship under multiple titles, also popularly known as critical race theory, something simple like that, that doesn't like define all those pieces, but that kind of globally says, hey, we know that this is being, a lot of people are saying different things that describe the same thing. This is my thought. Or, and maybe that's not the right phraseology. Maybe we have to think about that a little bit, but that's just my only thought. That kind of helps us realize that, hey, this is an ever-changing definition, or title, but it's under all these different titles. And just to kind of delineate the fact that, hey, we realize this has multiple titles.
If I may say something, the gentleman who very helpfully added point 3 to our discussion right now just walked in the room.
Oh my God, we had 6:45.
I'm not trying to embarrass you, but I am putting you on the spot.
Good timing.
So there's we just discussed the proposal here, and I think it's generally accepted. There's one suggestion from Chris that in point 3, you have it right there on paper, that something be added to the term critical race theory. Something like under multiple names, or could you say that again, please?
Yeah, something like that, under multiple titles or under multiple names, you know, known globally as critical race theory or something to that effect. I mean, Tim, you're an expert wordsmith, I'm not, so maybe there's a way of saying it that would kind of communicate what I'm trying to say.
Yeah,
That's more all encompassing, is that
Right.
what you're saying?
Right.
including but not limited to.
Yeah, that's simple too.
I guess one of the reasons that I did this paper is because this is the House bills in many different states, and they don't include any of that language.
Hmm.
And that's encompassing whole states. Sorry. Didn't print up enough.
I feel so bad. I apologize that I got my calendar wrong. So in the drafting of the item 2C, or actually 3, I guess it was sort of an acknowledgement of the fact that socially this is sort of an evolving discussion, and I steered clear of itemizing the sins of critical race theory, mostly because they, it's like a lot of legal scholarship with academic, but about the time you think you know what you're talking about, all of a sudden somebody gets a new PhD with a great thesis. It adds a whole new concept, and so I mean, we can attempt to adopt something that includes an itemization of these things, but I think we'd be poorly serving ourselves by doing it. The idea of leaving the door open to an evolution of the title of the of the theory seems like a good idea. We don't get ourselves in too deeply. And so, yeah, I like the idea that I mean, we can add a few words that says the critical race theory or other comparable areas of scholarship.
There, that's a good.
Great.
Great.
Yeah.
Educated, Tim.
That works.
You're packing up to leave already?
Is something like that wording acceptable to?
I think it's
the
perfect.
board,
Yeah.
the committee here?
Or other comparable areas of scholarship. That's what it is.
I told you you should have never left policy.
Doesn't seem like I've left. I just don't get a full time.
Sure you do.
So it would be my request that that the addition of a few words as suggested by Tim, that we move this to the board.
So that would be the October 13th meeting for action. Discussion and action.
Okay with
Yep.
that? Morgan?
Yep.
That's all you came for? We have other things on the agenda. Policy development and agenda order. I don't know if that interests you or not, but We're gonna have some communications about the board on board packet committee meetings and video recording, so. All right, we get to go from there.
Sure. In multiple meetings recently, we've had some conversation, and some was individual board member conversations with me. I don't think as a whole group, we've talked about this.
Appreciate it. Nice to meet you.
Thank you.
Well,
So we put this on the policy
Thanks, Shannon.
agenda, so anyone who was here could talk about and perhaps make suggestions that could either go to the full board for decision, or you could just be directing administration to tweak some of how we have been functioning. One of the topics, so about communications with the school board, from the school board. One of the topics is the board packet. Per law, what's required to provide to the community is the agenda. Some districts also provide the board packet. When the agenda is posted, the packet is also posted or linked. Some boards do not do that. I don't have for you it's 50-50 or 80-20. I don't have that for you. The board packet materials, unless there's anything confidential related to personnel evaluations or whatever, and we don't typically put that in the board packet anyway, that is all accessible to the public. And that happens. There are times where someone will email, can I have the board packet? I might be able to get that at the same time as the meeting, or very often it's the next day, through open records, it's always accessible. So that was one topic to talk about. Should we be, or would the board want to, it shouldn't be should we be, but would the board want to have that posted to the community in advance? And if so, would that be all documents included in your links or just some? So that's one topic. Another topic is the committee meeting minutes. Our board has functioned in that after minutes are approved, regular board meeting minutes, special board meeting minutes, those are always approved by the board to be formal, official minutes at the next regular board meeting, and then we post those on the website. Our district and many districts do not post committee meeting minutes because they're really not official. They're not approved by the board. They're shared with the board in the next agenda. So anyone that wasn't present at a committee meeting can see, here's what was discussed. And then, as you know, we typically review those minutes. Just because they're not approved doesn't mean they're not accessible to the public through an open records request. But that's one of my questions is, would you like us to just be posting those minutes on the website like we do our regular meeting minutes? So that's a second topic. And if we could talk about those first, and then the video recording is a kind of a different matter. The first two have some commonalities in terms of what goes to the public and at what timing.
My opinion on the board packet, I don't really feel that the public needs to see the bill list because it's so complicated. And I remember when I got on the board, it was a constant question. Why are we paying for this? Why are we paying for that? And I think that it's just gonna create a whole lot of confusion for people because we have so many different areas that our monies go to. Just say, for instance, and this was the first time it was ever in the on point, is the money that we spend for private voucher schools. That comes up in the bill list all the time. And I think that that's going to really create a lot of confusion for people if we start posting all those, especially when we've got all the different energy bills and all the electric bills and all those other things. I just don't know if the public needs to see the bill list. After all, it's sometimes 10 pages long.
No, it's more than that.
Yeah. I don't know how anybody else feels about that.
I think the other thing about the bill list, Don, is, it's extremely detailed. I mean, it's not an entry for FICA, okay, or for Social Security. There's an entry for every individual. There's an entry for, yeah, well, it isn't. Yes, it is. But I mean, that's just an example where you've got 100 some employees, 150 employees, you have 150 line items for that particular item. So it's not summarized. It's not a higher level summary, if you will. Okay, so I mean, I agree with you. I don't think it means heck, I may look through that thing. It's like, you go glassy eyed a little bit. And there's not an explanation of what some of these things are.
Correct.
Okay, so it's just a raw figure with a name attached to it. So there's, without knowing what is behind it, to some of it, I think you're right. It just raises a lot of questions that don't need, that are just.
I think that Laura has
You know,
more
whatever.
important things to do than to answer why the fire department bought $300 worth of stuff. You know, it's just, it's complicated.
Yeah.
I don't know.
I don't have a problem with other stuff being
No, I don't either.
displayed. I think that's a very prime example, of one that just doesn't make a lot of sense. If they want it, they can request it.
Correct.
And it remains public record.
Yes.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it is a public record, absolutely. But I don't think it needs to be shared as a regular part of the board packet per se. It just creates confusion.
Kim, have you
Right.
seen one yet?
I have not.
Okay.
So one of my frustrations with our board packet is the stuff that arrives on the day of the board meetings. It happened, particularly where it's, my personal pet peeve relates to legal analysis. I like to think I know something about that. When I'm handed a, multi-page document or memo or whatever, advising us as to what the law is, I would like an opportunity to reflect on that before I'm asked to start making decisions. And frequently, the information that we're given in respect to that, rubs up against our legal responsibilities, but does not address them directly. And we've got them in front of us, so it's the ultimate guidance. The one that I think of as a real problem recently was a memo that had been generated by a downtown law firm, generally for its clients, advising private sector businesses as to their potential liability in regard to masking and those sorts of things. And the liability of private sector companies, not private, the liability of the public sector institution are practically on different planets. That sort of thing I'd like to see in advance so that I can at least note for myself that we have to take that sort of thoughtful analysis with a grain of salt since it deals with different parts of the economy.
I would just comment that usually those things I put in the board brief memo. And there are times where board members will send to me, can you please provide this to all board members? And then I'll copy and they'll be at your place. Or sometimes things are added to the agenda late, and most often, I would venture to say 95% of the time, that is either a new hire or a new resignation. Those are typically the changes that happen like 24 hours ahead. Otherwise, almost everything is in the agenda already. And then some of those, have I ever at the last minute thought, oh, this might be helpful and printed it out for you at your spots? Yes. But often those are coming from some of you that are asking, share this. And maybe that shouldn't happen.
And one of the things, I sort of wonder if we have a closed session coming up, and frequently we'll get packets of documents in the closed session that then we're expected to return. And I mean, a closed session is intended to be not public. And so I sort of get all of that. And yet, oftentimes some of the most critical decisions that need to be made are the things that we have to discuss in closed session. And it's problematic that this stuff arrives just in time for us to sit down for closed session. So as we're talking about board packets, maybe some thought to go towards how we avail ourselves of the things that we're going to be asked and analyzed and discussed in those closed sessions, at least hours in advance, if not, you know, a day or so.
I think it's a great blessing that we have a lawyer on our board.
Oh my God, you're like the first person who's ever said that.
But I think it's fantastic that we do, and the fact that we have that resource, I think it's really, I agree with you on all those pieces, because the rest of us are not in the same realm as you when it comes to legal pieces. And I think we would all appreciate, you know, advice that you would have from a legal perspective on those things. To sort of have those things in advance, I think that would be, especially for you, obviously for all of us, since we're all one board, but it's extra helpful for you. And then with regards to the sharing of the board packet, the reason that I had brought that up was and a good example of a school that I think is doing that well is Swallow. If you look on Swallow's site, there's a lot that's shared, basically almost everything. I do understand the reason for not necessarily wanting to share the bill list, and I think that there's a good argument to be made for not necessarily sharing that. And if anybody wants it, they can always ask for it. But I think everything else should be as transparent as possible, including the minutes. I think that's a really good olive branch to continue to show that, hey, we're being as transparent as we can and everybody can see everything that we're saying. So those are two different thoughts.
I don't have a problem with the minutes being shared as long as they're stamped draft, because that's exactly what they are.
Yeah.
You know, they haven't been approved, so they are draft copies. And they should have big draft right across the center, but whatever. I never even considered closed minutes. I mean, closed meeting packet information. We rarely get anything from a closed session. I mean, I can't remember last time. I can't remember getting anything in a board packet dealing with a closed session. There's a reason it's a closed session. And as soon as it's sent out, there's a possibility it ends up ending up in the public's hands. And we can't have that. It's a closed session meeting. If that requires that we get into a closed session and it requires more analysis or more thought, then we just table it and call another closed session meeting later. But that, I don't believe that we can, in good conscience, share anything that's scheduled for closed session out to each other until, other than in the closed session itself, because of that. Because there's no guarantee it's going to stay closed once it's out on Ethernet.
Perhaps we just need to know that we're going to take more time for the closed session than we normally would.
Well, I don't think we ever rush it. I mean, we take the time we feel that is appropriate. But if there is, like you say, Tim, if there's something you think that we need to spend more time on, then we adjourn, reschedule another session to go over it or whatever. But
I mean, we've had closed sessions on, you know, pretty sophisticated contracts dealing with the sale of the farm. And I'd spend an hour on each one of those if I were advising a client. Or looking at it and making a decision in 10 minutes. So that's not that anything went wrong or that had I not felt comfortable moving ahead after those 10 minutes, knowing that we were paying outside counsel to advise us on those things. And yet it's hard for me to take off my lawyer hat, put on my member of the public hat and say, okay, I'll accept the advice of the lawyer and not bother to do this stuff. I mean, I understand your concern. We don't, you know, I can think of 100 reasons why the stuff that goes into closed session we should make every effort not to in real time have that out there in the world. It creates difficulties in negotiating deals. It creates personnel problems that you know, by law should not be out there. And yet, I don't think we do our jobs very well if we are least I don't feel like I do my job very well if I'm not given an opportunity to evaluate that stuff. Again, so I wonder if maybe expectation that, you know, from noon on the day of a meeting forward, anything that's going to be available to at a closed session is available here at the district office, so I can swing through and, you know, sit down and take a look at that package and have an opportunity to reflect on. And
And Tim, that it was, you would grab it from Laura's office, sit here and then return it, for
Yeah.
example.
I mean, if the concern is security, I guess that would be the.
It seems like the concern would be that it gets sent out electronically or it gets copied and
Mhm.
whatever.
Or even discussed, you know, even discussion.
Or do you know, do other school systems have a answer to this dilemma or with WASB?
Where I have worked, it has not been, closed session materials have not been sent out in advance, as I recall.
But they could be available if we wanted to come in and look, correct?
Sure. And then it's just, you know, it has to be understood. It's not talked about. Just like you all know that it can't, the matters can't be discussed after the meeting
Yeah,
either. So
but that's
that's not any
anyway.
different.
Yeah.
Right.
I think that's a good idea. Just having them available a few hours beforehand if anyone wants to come in and look at it. As for the board packets, I agree with what everybody said. The bill listing, I always have questions about it and I'll shoot an email with, you know, 3 or 4 questions for Jeff to answer. And on page such and such, what was this? What is this check number? So I can see where that might get a little bit time consuming if the public sees it and can't interpret, you know, what they're seeing anyhow. But the rest of it, I think, should be available to the public. Just why not? We should be as transparent as possible. I know you don't like that word. It's used too often.
It's just overused, I think, but yeah, I
Yeah.
understand.
But I do believe that we should make the board packets available, whether on our website right away or, you know, the easiest method.
And what we typically do is the board will get the agenda and the packet on Friday. And then the agenda, it gives the board some advanced information. And then the agenda is posted to the public on Monday before the meeting on Wednesday. The law says 24 hours in advance. So really, we could be posting up until Tuesday night for a Wednesday night meeting. We tend to have it done before that. We tend to put it up on Monday for the public and the board on Friday before. Your board policy about packets says, this isn't the exact wording, but approximate to the board members, approximately 48 hours in advance of a meeting. And, you know, of course, we're doing that well ahead of time. We also will change things if needed up until the 24-hour legal time frame, as I've already said, adding new hire names or resignations that come in. So if there's consensus that a board packet should be shared with the exception of the bill list, is what I'm hearing, I would propose that happens at the same timing that we typically would put the agenda up to the public, and then the links that would be in your board packet would be there in that agenda to the public on Monday. So it still gives the board some advanced information. We know that some of that information goes out from board members on a Friday. It's going out to the public. I've seen things that are posted on Facebook Friday evening or wherever, but it's public information.
I didn't realize that it wasn't publicly available right now. Yeah, so. Looks like it should be.
Well, I think the agenda's been there, just the links haven't been on the webpage.
Correct.
Yeah.
Correct.
But there's nothing wrong with putting the links out there, you know, I don't have any problem with that.
It's good.
Yeah. It may solve some questions before the board meeting.
Mhm.
Or help, you know. Help with some things we've had, who knows?
Is that something you feel like the board should take to the next meeting for a formal vote, or would you just like to, we have the majority of the board members here. reaching consensus. Is that something you just want to say administratively?
Yeah.
Let's just tweak that practice.
But can we still put draft on it,
Yes, on the minutes.
on the minutes?
Okay,
That sounds good.
I'd like draft on the minutes.
Well, okay, let me clarify that, because we don't put the minutes until they are approved from
Oh.
regular meetings. So they're
So,
coming up a month later. If anyone asks, like an open records request, then I provide them, just as you're saying, with draft written across the top. That's primarily been reporters, but also members of the public. The committee meeting minutes, those are never approved. So would you like those posted? And if so, would it be whenever they're done after the committee meeting? Or would that be similar to regular board minutes where in the next board meeting, you're reviewing those minutes as a board
Yeah.
and then
that would work.
post them?
I would just say keep it with the packet,
Yeah.
how we do it now.
Okay.
Even with the packet.
Yeah.
I do think it's probably a good idea to start getting into a practice of voting on these things. I do agree that we're all pretty much in consensus, but I think it should be brought up at the next meeting as a vote. Which, just to make this change to say, okay, we're gonna make the board packet available to the public, just so it's on record as a vote.
Okay.
Because I think there's been a lot of kind of agreements without votes, and I think that would help. That sounds okay with everyone.
I guess what I would suggest is rather than doing that, well, I mean, doing that as well, but actually putting in the procedure, that that's a change to the procedure itself. Or the policy, whichever, wherever that's stated, whether it's a procedure in the policy itself. And then vote on the policy at the board meeting.
Okay.
So I guess I'm gonna take the next step down the line, then we have minutes that I think are lacking in some of the links that we have the benefit of in the agendas. And I wondered if we shouldn't be addressing that. Maybe we need to have that as an agenda item for a different policy meeting. But for instance, we adopt draft rule changes at a board meeting. And when you look at the minutes, it says adopted draft rule changes, and it doesn't tell you what the rule is. It tells you what the number is, but it doesn't tell you what the text is that we've adopted. And, you know, for instance, the slight edit to the minutes that I had requested at our last board meeting was because it said adopted proposed rule changes amended. And so we neither knew the text of what was being proposed nor the amendment under the minutes. And so I'm thinking that those minutes need a level of detail and, you know, maybe electronic link comparable to what would be in the agenda, so that if I look back at it a year later, I can see what we had approved as far as terminology, and if there's an amendment, what that amendment was.
Good point.
Yeah, that's a very good point. I would think that, I'm sure that could all be rolled in the same policy, so that when we approve the policy at the board meeting, it's all done in one fell swoop. I don't think that needs to come, I mean, it's up to you as chairman, whether you want to bring that back to the next policy committee meeting or just take it to the board.
I'd like to take it to the board right away and just be done with this whole communication to the board. Just one, because it can be included. Is there a policy number on that?
No, I'll have to look and see
Oh, because I was.
where, I'll have to see if we have policy related to packet and minutes.
Packet information.
We certainly do about the materials go to the board ahead of time. I'll just need to find the right
Or
place.
will we have to make a new policy?
I think we can,
Incorporate it.
I think we'll incorporate it.
All right.
I'll work on that. And if not, it could always be
Subsection.
a motion to approve at the next meeting, so it's done, and then write a new policy if need be, but I think we can weave it in.
Okay, I have one question. So we said we're gonna put draft on the committee meetings that will be linked to the school board agenda packet. We're gonna put the word draft on there.
Not on the committee meeting, not on the committee ones.
No,
just
because
on
they're
the-
never
yeah,
approved.
because they're not approved anyway.
Okay, but the ones that are linked on there that like we're approving the August 11th, those minutes I will have to put draft if I'm linking them to the agenda. Because they'll be available to the public prior to your approving
Actual
them,
approval. That's a good point.
right?
Yes.
So I'll have to put draft there.
Well, I don't know, because
Or no.
so many things in there aren't approved yet, so I would say they're presumed draft. Otherwise, anything in your board packet would have to say draft because you're discussing and acting. So I
And
don't,
we do put the approved minutes on the website after they've been approved. So if somebody's looking for the final, they would go to that place, not in the board packet.
Well, why don't we just put why don't we put a statement on the agenda itself that minutes that are included in the agenda or linked to the agenda have not been officially approved yet.
So the cynic in me says that somewhere out in the world, there are people who want to read what we do. And if we simplify it by hitting the 3 buttons necessary or put the word draft across on an approved set of minutes, we avoid the possibility that, you know, somebody comes up with an official Arrowhead document that says the minutes were this and what's on the website saying they're that, and what we've done terrible things. And it's not that they could come up with a way to suggest that we've done it anyhow, but at least we take the low hanging fruit off.
that makes sense. When it says minutes across the top, whether they've been approved or not, you don't know that if they're,
Look, I've got a
Emailed
hard copy
out.
of the actual minutes. and look
Right.
what they're posting.
Yes, updates the high extent. Good point.
Does that answer your question? Kate?
Yes.
Okay. Video recording.
so several months ago, the board, well, let me go back even farther in time. We had been doing video recording. Bob Angeli was able to have the time to volunteer to do that. And that didn't work out for him as a volunteer any longer. We looked into doing video recordings, we looked at equipment and so forth, and then the board decided, let's video record meetings, regular board meetings. And we put that into practice. About the same time we put that into practice, we've been having some meetings here, we've been having some meetings in the cafeteria. So our meeting location has changed, the size of the room. We've been wanting to record some committee meetings rather than regular board meetings, and it just is not working. It's like for Kate to be trying to take the meeting minutes and work a live stream if there's board members working remotely, that's one computer. Another computer is linked to the camera, so therefore she doesn't have a computer to be taking minutes. It's taking way too much time to write minutes and then rewrite minutes because there's multiple computers going on. And I don't know that the videotaping can be of high quality if the minutes are of high quality, and I don't think the minutes can be of high quality if we're recording. And when you look at some of our recordings, you're seeing an empty podium. It's helpful audio wise in terms of clarifying minutes, but it's not working. So I think the board needs to reconsider how we're doing video recording. Are we doing it? And if we are, how much are you willing to spend and what gets cut to make it work? Because we're gonna have to hire someone to do this separately. I don't know how else we can do it effectively.
I think the point is, Bob, you're missed.
Well, for what it's worth, for many years, we had simply a tape cassette going.
Right.
During the meeting. And so that there was a record, it was an audio record, not a video record. It was as simple as push the button, half hour later, flip the tape over, push the button again. That was full technology. But something comparable could be done. I don't know how important it is to us or the members of the public that it be a video recording versus an audio recording. They're still recording. It's just a thought to be put up.
Yeah, I think an audio recording is really all that everybody needs. I mean, as beautiful as we all are as a board, I don't think anybody
Speak
needs
for yourself.
needs to see our ugly mugs every day, but yeah, I think an audio recording, just so it's, you know, recorded is acceptable to me.
But how does the public? Right, they would come in and listen to a cassette.
Well, no, I mean, it's
Or it could
everything's
be
digital now.
posted
You
to
can be
the
able to do
website
a
also.
digital post. I mean,
Post.
it's a lot better. The technology is amazing. So, you know, the digital post of a, you know.
Wouldn't be the same.
An 8-track.
No, yeah.
I got a track you can have.
I would
Real,
rather, I
real.
mean, if we had that kind of extra money to spend on somebody to video record, I would rather take that money and put it towards somebody for PR for our school. We just don't have a pot big enough to be able to hire somebody to do this at every single meeting. I don't know what that cost would be, but I'm assuming it would be 25,000 a year. Bob, yes, no?
I don't know, I've always sort of thought that you get students to come and volunteer.
Yeah.
Give them a credit,
Yeah.
or pay them $10 an hour or something.
It's a great resume builder.
Yeah.
I don't know if that would work.
Well, Bob's son did it for a while,
Yeah,
a
my son did
student
it.
coming in and, but you
And
had
why
the
didn't
nice
he quit?
equipment.
Soccer.
There you
Well,
go.
but it could
That's-
be-
I mean, it's worth maybe trying, but you have to acknowledge ahead of time that you may have inconsistency and unreliability.
I think
Well, you
that-
could have a few students do
several.
it, kind of backing each other up.
Could
Excuse
be
me,
like
not-
an AV club or.
Yeah,
I mean,
just recruit from that and.
We can
see
ask.
if
I can't
some
guarantee
students are
that.
interested.
And that could be,
I think it's important to still have a video. I know.
Most
lots of
districts do.
schools- Yeah, most of them do. And then you can even go and see someone else's meeting. And I've watched Oconomowoc School Board meetings and they're not anything fancy, but at least you know what's going on and you can see everyone. And I prefer that over having to sit and listen to something, sit in front of your computer. I don't know. I like the video aspect of it. It's a record. It's out there. It's always there. If someone misses a meeting or, you know, you're in your home and it's raining and you don't want to come, you can just watch it on the computer. I think we should do all we can to try to keep the video recordings going.
Or
Sure, spending a lot of money.
Or soon.
Yeah.
Is there an audio visual club? I don't.
Video productions class, but it currently meets once a semester.
Once a semester.
One semester,
semester,
one
it doesn't meet all year. So that, we could ask them, those students that are interested in that. Yes.
I
Do
mean,
they have
wouldn't you
equipment?
think the students would want to come sit in the board meeting?
I'm positive they're gonna be thrilled, but no, I
Those are the
think,
10 or
yeah,
11 at night.
it's worth asking. It would be extra, it is best when it builds into like, they have a different focus for that video production and animation class. Board meetings, I'm certain, don't fit the bill in terms of what their creative juice is flowing, but I mean, if you've got somebody who's really interested and wants the opportunity, we can ask.
They might get a little creative with emojis and different faces and all that kind of stuff.
They- they
It might
do
not
have
be
a
what we
lot of
want.
those capabilities, so we have to put some rules in place about, yeah, you can't put, yeah,
Yeah.
Can't have a pineapple.
Right.
that's right.
And I mean, maybe our target recruits aren't sitting in the, you know, audio or the video productions class. Maybe they're sitting in some of the government classes.
Yeah, that's true.
Sure.
Because I mean, all you gotta do is hit record and make sure the person who's talking is on the video.
I mean, if it's as simple as recording on a phone and uploading a video, I know it's not that simple. We don't need to think about equipment, sound, it's sound quality, there's some things we have to put in place.
And you know, when you don't have.
yeah,
money-
we'd be using the equipment that we've
Yeah,
purchased.
Yeah, yep.
And I know even when Bob's son was doing it, I could tell he was kind of bored a lot of the time because he was usually on his phone. But he did a great job.
But I mean, when you don't have money to spend, you can always give a kid a title. Something to put on their college
Or
application.
production
Oh, yeah.
manager.
My girls love the title.
Fancy title.
Wow.
All right, we'll try and entice with a fancy
We'll
title.
work on it and see what we can.
So then when I'm sorry, Chair, I guess
So go ahead.
I'm trying to do the wrap up statement here. So we're gonna post audios and hope we can get a video. Is that where we settled on?
No, I think we're gonna try to get video. I'm
Right.
assuming that's what we're trying to do is get video and
And back to regular board
Yeah.
meetings. I mean, we can't have a student at committee meetings.
No.
No.
Thank you, that's helpful.
unless Mr. Angeli wants to share those with us, because he seems to be here anyway.
They're online. It's,
What's that?
they're online.
Kara, House Institute. I'll reach out to them.
Is it in session now, or is it next semester? Oh, it's not even in session now. Okay,
So, but it doesn't mean we can't reach out to those kids and if they've got interest.
because they're already signed up for it?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay.
Can I ask, did you guys say you're having?
Just what you see, that camera and the speaker.
Are you thinking of improving it or just leaving it?
We had no budget to even do that.
Policy 121.
Okay, on policy 121, which is the policy about policy development. How many times can you say policy in one sentence? On the second page, 1, 2, 3, 4, the fourth paragraph says at any regular board or any regular meeting of the board. This is what got us into, I don't know, this got us into a hassle several meetings ago. As board members may recall, Amy had made a motion at one point to appoint one candidate to the vacant board seat. That wasn't her policy and it wasn't part of the agenda. So with open meetings laws and the board would not want to break one of its policies, that motion had to be put aside. And so then we went through with the attorneys that were helping us through that vacant seat process. We had to go through several motions. So there was a motion to suspend a policy. And then there was a motion to adopt a temporary policy for one night. And then we used that temporary policy. Then another policy was adopted. That was all going to happen on August 18th, when the attorney saw in our policy 121 that it says at any regular meeting of the board, policies of the board may be suspended, enacted, or amended, provided that prior notice of the proposed action has been included as an action item on the agenda. Meeting of August 18th was a special board meeting. Special board meetings we will hold periodically, and there is action at those meetings. So when Bob Butler saw this and we had to kind of put a screeching halt, now we can't do that at the 18th. We're going to have to do all of that rigmarole on the 23rd in
Because
order
it's a
to.
special meeting rather than a regular.
Right, so Bob Butler had said, this is, his words were, this is highly unique, highly unique in your policy to have it say at any regular meeting of the board. So I bring that forth as you may want to change that. At any meeting of the board, take out regular, and it wouldn't be a committee meeting because you don't act at committee, you don't vote at committee meetings. So it could just be at any at any meeting, or you could specify at any regular or special meeting. Those are the two meetings where you have actions or voting items.
Personally, I'd prefer
Or you
the
could leave
latter.
it and
I
then
would
we just
prefer the
have to be,
latter as well, just because a regular, the meeting could be this.
So regular or,
Yeah, don't you think?
there aren't any other kinds, are there?
other than committee meetings where we
Right.
don't
Yeah.
have votes.
Right. That's fine.
Okay, so we would move that modification to the board on the October 13th meeting
Yes.
for discussion and action.
I have a change I would like to see back on the previous page under that. On the second paragraph, second line down, it says, or when directed by the board, prepare written regulations. I would like to strike the word regulations. It has procedures in parentheses. I'd like to get rid of the parentheses. We don't really write regulations per se. We're writing procedures.
We have
Pre-
policy and
and
procedures.
So I think the word regulations just doesn't apply. And just replace that with the procedures without the parentheses.
You're welcome to come to our policy meeting in May where we'll review all these.
Sounds like
You'll
fun.
be there.
I think I'm on town that
Your
day.
Policy book.
Reese's got 8 months to think about it.
Yeah. we're gonna
That's
start
right.
reading this out.
Okay, is there consensus on that change as well? Okay, then we will modify this policy and bring it forth for a vote on the 13th.
Well, that was easy.
Yeah.
All right. Next on the list is 151.5.
And this one, in developing the agenda, Kent had asked me to put this on. Policy 151.5, is agenda format. And so this school board has a policy of here's the order of the agenda for regular board meetings. I would recommend we put on here agenda format. I would suggest we put regular board meeting agenda format. That's what we use this for. We don't use it for committee meetings. We don't use it for special board meetings. So to clarify, this is the regular board meeting. And then we have recently been having the board, we've put a motion on the agenda to change the order and have the superintendent report before communications and comments from members of the public. That's happened multiple times in order to hopefully inform the board or the board and community before comments occur that may be on the same topic. So I guess the question came up, should we change the policy and have the superintendent report regularly before the comments? And then if need be, it could always be flipped
By motion.
by, yeah,
Yeah.
a motion notice.
Like a good idea to me.
Okay, move that forward for
Sounds like you have a consensus there, Madam Chairman.
policy change. So we'll change the title to include regular board meeting, and what would it be, number 7 and number 8 flip-flopped. Thank you.
I'll be here all day.
Oh, goody.
0.5, potential board community learning listening sessions.
Our administrative team had some discussions about this, and we're talking about a board, community learning and listening sessions. Fully realize that. But we talked as an administrative team about some districts do that with the principal. Some, look back at Adam. I'm not volunteering you, I'm just saying, some districts have a PTO group that meets every month and it's woven into that with a principal. Some districts have forums or discussion sessions with school boards. And so just administratively, we were talking about pros and cons of both. And I thought it would be beneficial for the board to talk through, because there was clearly a desire by community members to have more of a free flow of discussion with board members. And that just doesn't happen at regular board meetings. That's not how board meetings are designed. Administratively, we would just ask that you think about a possible way to get that rolling if you were going to do it at all. So if you were going to have quarterly or however often, every 2 months or whatever you were thinking, one idea would be we're in the process of developing a parent satisfaction survey anyway. The goal is to have that done in October. We'll have the board review it, and that would go out to parents at the beginning of November. Within that survey, we could alert the community, well, it's the parents, but at least that's a chunk of our community, that we're going to have these learning and listening sessions, whatever you want to call them. And here are a bunch of possible topics. Rate those topics of interest. Do you have any other topics of interest? So we're getting information right away from our parents. What topics do you want to talk about, learn about? And then it could be something in terms of format where, depending on the topic, it might just be a free flow of conversation, or it might be a 10-minute, whichever administrator would make most sense. So let's say it's about special education. Well, Adam Bolt might be there to do a 10-minute overview of here's what special education looks like at Arrowhead, or what the law says, or something like that. And then it could be a discussion between board members and community members. I think we'd have to make sure going into each session that the people there would understand this is a discussion. It's not action. It's not, there could be things that would be brought up that board members would be saying, that's a great idea. Let's do that. And then a couple weeks later, find out, oh, we can't do that. It doesn't go according to law or policy or our current curriculum, and that will take changes. So we just want to make sure the public understands there's not actions. These are discussions and learning and listening. So the board can learn and listen to the community can learn and listen from the board or certain topics that might be presented. So I just tossed those out as some ideas that we were talking about administratively as you're planning what these sessions might be. And you certainly as a board could say, let's have it be with the principal or with the superintendent rather than the board. I was hearing in that annual meeting format, it was more community wanting to talk with the board, but
Like,
that's
not just talk to us, but
Talk with us.
have a conversation.
right.
Yeah.
Right, not just public comments where you're not able to
Right.
respond because it's not on the agenda. It's the to and from,
Well, it wouldn't be a board meeting per se, it'd just be a gathering of the board and the public.
right? We would still be posting it.
Right.
Even though no decisions would be made, it's a group of board members.
Kim, you were involved in that at Marquette. Can you tell us how that went?
That was a little bit different than I think what Laura's talking about.
Okay.
I think what you're alluding to is something that truly is open to the whole public. While Marquette had parent representatives that sat on this committee,
How many were there?
there were only 2 or 3 representatives
Oh,
at any
okay.
given time,
At a
And
time?
Parents wise, right?
parent-wise.
But you
parent-
had a lot,
parent
there were much bigger
representatives.
committees.
The committee itself was about maybe 18, and it was a real diverse group of people. But parent-wise, there were only 2 or 3 reps. Looking back at the experience, I think perhaps one of the things that they didn't do as well as they could have is to let the parents know who the parent representatives were
Okay.
to bring forth any kind of issues. And so you end up kind of searching and talking, doing whatever you can to discern from the parents what you want to see come forward. But I think you're talking about a very different type of forum, where in general, you're opening things up with the board, but you're having a give and take. And
Right.
I'm a strong advocate of that. I mean, I think that the frustration at some point from the public right now is that they want discussion, and the format of the meeting itself doesn't allow for it.
Right.
I think there was a lot of goodwill when Tim went around with the microphone at our annual meeting, and community members were like, wow, we feel like we're being heard and you guys are talking to us and we're talking to you. I think there should be no agenda and just say open forum, that kind of situation where we go around with the microphone, say, okay, what do you guys want to talk about? What's on your minds? Because this is really for them, right? More than anything. And then we can have an open dialogue. And then if there's great ideas that come from that can come into these committees and we can talk about it. And if we need to change policies, that'll move up to our board meetings, but I think there was a lot of goodwill that came from that annual meeting going around to the different members. I think they felt heard. I think that's what they really want.
I think the only problem with that, Chris, is the fact you have 40 people in the room, you have 40 different topics and nothing really gets covered. I think the idea of having different topics or maybe multiple topics at a particular meeting, at least you can concentrate on some areas that the public is concerned about. Otherwise, I think you end up with a kind of a free for all and nothing really gets, you don't really have a good sharing of ideas. Laura's got an idea, Bob's got an idea. They're not the same. You don't really have any time to go into depth with it, that kind of stuff. That's where I think I have a problem with doing it as just an open free for all and any topic is fair game. You could also have at the end of it, kind of that thing, same thing. There's things that we'd like to further discuss or topics for further discussion, perhaps in future meetings. I like the idea of having something that's kind of not guided, well, yeah, a little bit guided. Okay, here's a topic that, like you said, perhaps with a survey, here are the topics that we feel we'd really like to address and hit them on a scheduled basis. Okay, the number one we're going to have in January, number two we'll have in February, number three, whatever. And as topics proceed, or as it goes, of course, something else comes up and that may rise to the top as a topic that, well, we're not doing this in March, we're going to talk about, I'm just picking January, February, March, it just takes nothing. I mean, just example. It's on something else becomes a hot topic or something more of interest to the public, and they'd rather do that than what they had on their original list of topics. But I think you get a much better discussion if you're kind of concentrating on a particular topic area that's of particular interest.
Well, I guess I agree with what you have to say about that, Kent, because it lets us as a board sort of prepare ourselves on a particular subject matter rather than kind of randomly fielding questions. But I have to say that that's for the benefit of the board. I think part of what's going on is that an outlet for our community to come let us know what they're thinking. And I know that one of the great frustrations I hear from people who have been my ear over the last 3 or 4 months, where I've got more phone calls and emails than I ever had in the entire history of my time on the board prior to that, is the fact that they feel like we use our agendas and our tools to shut them down and make it so that it's impossible to have a conversation about the things that they're concerned about, arrive at our meetings. And I think that at least to begin with, we need to, topic number one is, to reassure the community that they've got a place to go to be heard, regardless of whether it's on the agenda that day. And if it turns out that that's unmanageable, approach to a meeting, which very well might be, at least we've made that effort 1 or 2 times so that nobody gets turned away because they don't happen to be talking about the thing that we've declared as the subject of the day. And I think you can blend it, right? I think that you can say that, an open discussion with the board with, some focus on such and such. And if the topic is, athletics at Arrowhead and somebody shows up and wants to talk to you about masks, you know what? So what? Let's hear about the masks.
I think that's, I think I was going to say, you could have a hybrid of the two. So you have a topic that half the discussions, half the hour and a half discussion is going to be on that topic, and the rest of it's wide open for whatever anybody wants to talk about. So that way you've kind of covered both aspects. You've got the top topics that have been identified that people want to talk about, and then you open up for whatever somebody wants to talk about. I don't know, is that
Just the other
kind
first
of
one.
talking about blending?
Well, it sounds like the parent satisfaction survey that's going out is going to very specifically kind of clue into some of those issues that the parents want to have discussed.
Right, that was our line of thinking, that you'd see, whoa, the majority of people want to talk on these 3 or 4 topics. These were of lesser interest. And that will help, I would anticipate, that would help pull people in. Here's the topic. So all of those people that were interested come, and that that'll be talked about. Where if I'm, Jane Doe in the public, and every so often there's an open discussion with board members, I may or may not, like, I don't want to come if it's a gripe session with the same 5 people showing up and complaining. I want to talk about this. I don't know if I'd feel as comfortable, but if it's, oh, here's 2 topics that I'm going to mark my calendar for, because I know that there's something I'll learn from and I can share about. And then maybe it's the last half of the meeting or the last certain amount. It's just any other topics. It might be one person's topic and that's done and it's satisfied. Or it might be, whoa, here's a topic that we didn't realize is bubbling up. Let's put that on for next month or next quarter, however often you're doing it.
Or, I like the hybrid idea too, that we have a topic or 2 identified from a survey. And then maybe at the end or after that, say it's open to discussion about anything you want. But the idea of having a topic identified in your initial statement or is helpful, because then if it's about special education, then we know that Adam Gold can be there, for example. And if it was just all free flow, you wouldn't know who might be able to address the public in the best way or engage in a question and answer with the public in the best. Who's the most knowledgeable person there? So also another question would be, so we're putting together a survey.
Yes.
Correct? Is that really time consuming, money consuming, difficult, or is that something we could do prior to each, say, for example, quarterly meeting, where we could actually identify a topic or 2 quarter, where the information would be newer information, as opposed to laying out a year's worth or something.
Yeah, we
We
could
do
survey.
that. I mean, I think we could start with an initial kind of list of things that are
Right.
possible interests or concerns, things that we know folks want to talk about, and then see if we can kind of get a schedule going, if you will, and then quarterly we can continue to update that.
I think what you want to do with that, Sue, is list your topics, potential topics, but also have an open
Right.
comment section. That something we didn't think about, that may be the hot topic of
And
the
if that
the day.
seems to be like, where there's a lot of interest to talk further about it, that becomes another listening session.
And, you know, I kind of feel like this sort of thing is the product of the times. Right? I mean, for 10 years before this, before May or April, we
Yeah.
would have had any excuse for having it. And so I'm a little fearful of devoting a bunch of nights to a meeting that nobody shows up. I mean, we've had annual meetings for years where we get the same 5 people showing up and nobody else from the entire district.
We did that weekly during referendum time.
Yeah.
And
And
so-
like,
Sitting here
just
for
for the
hours.
help is we asked parents what time would be most appropriate.
We're
Well,
busy.
So my thought is this, that also as a product of the time where the parents and the taxpayers are not feeling heard by this board, maybe we adopt a policy that allows, you know, a person with 5 signatures of other, you know, community members to demand an open meeting with the board. And so that as that frustration builds, that the administration has a place to point them at, saying, you know, if you're not feeling heard, this is how you get a meeting of the board. I mean, maybe we put some reasonable restrictions on it, like not more than, you know, 4 per year or something like that. But, you know, let's have 1 or 2 of these things, adopt a policy that lets people demand open meeting of the board, and then we can have them as we know that there's going to be attendees interested in participate.
5 may be a low threshold.
Yeah.
You may again have 5 people, 3 of them, only 3 of the signed the petition show up.
Yeah.
What about if you do something like a registration, like we're having this session, are you interested? Please let us know. And then, you know, we could give more information, or we could see how many people actually sign up. So we don't hold a thing where nobody comes.
Meaning also.
Like a
that-
pre-registration, just to let us know. Yeah, like an RSVP.
But then that implies that, what, if there's, say, less than 10, we would cancel the meeting, or what would happen?
So do you
And I
have
guess
a,
my other thought about that is that, so if I didn't sign up for it, should I feel like I should come
And we do have to post it in advance, so I don't, depending on the registration period,
I mean, I'm
in
with
terms of
you.
canceling.
Yeah, I just thought it would be some way to weed out, is this going to be successful? Will people show up if we had a list of, are you coming, or are you interested? What do you think you'll attend? You know, just something like that.
Not that it's a direct relationship, but I am wondering, when you send out a survey and ask for parents to respond, do you have a sense of what percent respondents look like?
Yeah, I mean, we know our total parent population, and then we'll see how many responses. And we'll have some demographic information in there as well, in terms of how many parents, ninth graders, 10th grade, 11th, 12th, so forth.
And
But a prediction of how many would answer the survey.
yes,
No,
no, you don't.
generally,
Our newsletter. So our monthly newsletter, when we looked at a few years ago, how many people actually read or open it. You can't tell if they're reading it, but how many open it?
Mhm.
The best we had was 30%. It was typically more like 24%, which felt like, oh my gosh, all this work and no one's reading it. But then when I asked some communications people, they said that's a really good reader rate or whatever they'd call it. So I don't know if surveys would mirror that or not. The survey that we're developing is more general on multiple topics, which you'll see next month, a satisfaction survey for parents and students. We're just talking about weaving in one question related to this, because there'll be, I don't know, 20 or 30 other questions about the school in general. Will we get it?
I would anticipate we would have,
50% maybe at best.
yeah, I mean, other surveys that I've been granted, that I've sent out for virtual learning satisfaction things last year, we had pretty high response rate, but still 25, 30%. First two, but CLNA surveys, yeah, for 10% or 12%. So depends on the topic. I think we'd have pretty decent participation.
I feel like getting
Continuous, like, it helps to update, say like, hey, your opportunity to, to answer the survey still exists. You can keep sending it out, notifying people.
if you're only getting,
If
if you're only getting 30% roughly with the topic of virtual learning, which was a big topic last year.
Don't quote me on that.
I know,
number. It
but I
was-
mean,
yeah.
But it certainly wasn't an 80%,
No, it
you know,
wasn't.
so I mean, even that, I mean, that was a big thing. I think everybody had an opinion on that.
People are busy. parents
Yeah,
busy,
people are.
so they-
People miss it, people forget.
And if they're highly satisfied, they're not going to take the time to answer a survey necessarily. It's, it's often, here's my issues, or here's what I want you to know.
I think with Adam's new newsletter, though, he could probably put a gentle reminder in those quite often.
Right, and it would
hopefully
be,
people are reading those.
these learning and listening sessions, or whatever you'd want to call them, would be posted to the public the same way we post our board meetings. So while our parents are on an email list that would get this information more readily, it would be known by the public. So it wouldn't just be parents that could show up.
Are you thinking quarterly, every other month?
This is a board thing, so I think you have to talk
I
about
mean,
that.
I'd say schedule number 1, and see what happens.
See what happens. Yeah, go from there.
Well, another thing, when we would get a little feedback, if we got a lot of people, then maybe it's more frequently. If it trickles down to like the typical years past annual meeting where there are 3 or 4 members of the public, maybe it needs to become less frequent. And it's take it as it goes.
And be a great question to put out there for the first meeting.
Yeah.
Right. So in the survey question, in our satisfaction survey, the survey question, we can put something like the school board is considering holding learning and listening sessions, or periodic learning and listening sessions. So leave it vague.
Yes.
I would ask board members, if you we could brainstorm now or just email to me. What are topics we should put on there as suggestions or ideas? And then of course, we'll leave an open response for other topics that they can add to it. But if you think of topics that are probably you're hearing a lot from the community about, or things that seem pretty natural, or even topics that you feel like the community should learn about, and maybe they don't even know they want to learn about it.
They don't know what they don't know.
If you want to feed those to me or brainstorm now, however you'd like to do that.
Say feed them to you because I have to leave in a few minutes.
Okay.
That sounds fair.
Okay, that sounds good. And then that survey will come to the board. I'm thinking next month, probably another policy committee meeting. So you can review that survey and add any feedback.
Were we thinking we were gonna have one of these listening sessions and topic for community? Are we asking the right questions, or are there other questions we should be asking?
We weren't intending that. We were having the survey developed, the satisfaction survey based on school perceptions company that worked with other school districts. So we have lots of samples. And Daryl Beneker, who's had his 25-year career doing surveys through Aurora, he's been helping with that also. So,
I guess
but
I
there's
misunderstood
enough
it.
open-ended questions in that satisfaction survey that leads, it will allow parents to share on topics that we might not specifically be asking about. Because the survey is not just about the sessions, that would be
I
just,
just misunderstood the discussion. I thought that was the opening subject. Is it, was the first meeting, were we suggesting that the first meeting was going to be a review of the survey, or I thought the survey and that meeting was somehow connected?
no, I just mentioned the satisfaction survey, since that's going out to all parents anyway, and hopefully will be of high interest. We could include a question or a informational piece. The board is considering holding these. We could send a separate email as well, or just the separate email.
Or just include with it the actual date of the first open discussion. If you're interested in these subjects, that board's holding an open discussion. It might reduce the number of people to send back the survey. It might just all show up at the theater one thing.
Well, that's a good point. We don't,
But I mean, it gets the word out there. I mean, we say it's on this date, please return the survey anyhow.
Yeah, because the survey is much more broad than just this. I mean, it's just one or two questions
Right.
perhaps, but
right. I mean, it'll be a survey we'll do every 2 years or every year or something like that. It's really separate from these learning sessions.
Right.
We have to schedule another meeting. The survey, should we schedule policy for like the last Thursday because of the survey? Just to give it.
The
another-
last Thursday, the 28th would not be good. That's an in-service day for
Okay.
staff. It's a non-student, non-school day. So maybe October
The
21st.
21st.
7 a.m.
Probably at 7.
normally it's 7, yes. Other than curriculum.
Curriculum 6:45. usually.
Okay.
Any other comments, suggestions, issues?
For the hour.
Welcome to policy. Isn't it exciting? Thank you. You can be part of it. Can we adjourn this meeting? All righty. Meeting
All right.
adjourned. 8:15.
Well
Thanks,
done.
everyone.
An hour and a half.
Good discussion.
Got it through.